Hello, fellow time travelers. My name is James, and I am the Community and Education Outreach Specialist here at the Keweenaw Time Traveler. In anticipation for our upcoming launch of that new Explore app, we're hosting a series of lunchtime chats with members of our Keweenaw Time Traveler team. During this series, you'll be hearing from a whole bunch of people about the great work our team has been doing to develop some of the new and exciting things that you'll get to experience in our new release. Today, I'm excited again to be talking with Dr. Dan Trepal about his work geocoding the census. So Dan, I know we talked last week about all your work with the census data. Today, we're going to be talking about geocoding. In general, what is geocoding?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, James. And I'm excited to sort of continue our little conversation here about how we're doing this project. Geocoding is really simple in principle. It's essentially just taking a piece of information and then assigning it a specific location on the Earth using geographic coordinates. And so that could be sort of any meaningful coordinates that a computer particularly can understand. And we typically do this with computers nowadays. And so you can take any piece of information, assign to it coordinates, and that piece of information is then linked with a location on the Earth.
Interesting. So I knew nothing about geocoding before joining the team a couple of years ago. How do you geocode the census data? We've received them from IPUMS, our partners over there at IPUMS. Is that complicated or is it pretty easy to do?
Well, it's relatively simple in principle, but it's actually a lot of work. And it's a combination between, using geographic information system software to collect and organize and visualize information, but also doing some good old-fashioned sleuthing of historical records. And one way you could look at the process of geocoding is to kind of call it mapping. We sometimes just say we're mapping something when we're actually geocoding it. So the census, as we talked about last week, in a nutshell, is essentially a huge list of people with a bunch of information about those people recorded in physical record sets, which have then been turned into digital record sets that we can work with on the computer. So in order to geocode those or map them, essentially what we're doing is using the clues about where these people live that are contained in the census documents, and then attempting to tell the computer or assign on the computer a meaningful location on the Earth for that person based on the information or evidence we have about where they live. And that could be something as exact as a street address, the home that they lived in, but that's not always the case.
Awesome. So I know the last time we had a big team meeting, you talked about the 4 geographies or so that we've been geocoding people to. Can you kind of explain what that means?
Sure. So as I just said, when you're attempting to geocode or map people using a historic record set, you're trying to glean information from that record set and then turn that into a place on the Earth where you can sort of digitally put that person in this case. Now, the thing about historical records is that they have a lot of limitations. They were collected for one purpose, but you might be using them for another purpose. So there's missing information. There's information that has to be translated into different formats to make them understandable, particularly to make them digital and understandable by a computer. So not all the records can be geocoded or mapped using the exact same types of information. And in order to make that work with the census, we had to come up with 4 different types of places that people could be mapped to. And those were the building that they lived in, which is sort of our gold standard where we want to put everybody, the street that they lived on, what we're calling a settlement, which is just a named place that you can associate with a person. That could be a village or a town, for example, or in the case of the copper country, it could be the location of a mining site where they may have been working and living at. And then finally, the enumeration district, which is a special sort of geographic place within which people were recorded in the census, because the census was actually gathered by people called enumerators who went house to house collecting information on each individual and writing it down in those original paper forms. And each enumerator was assigned a certain area to work inside. And that was sort of mapped at the time, although not always very reliably or exactly. But we do know if someone was mapped within a certain enumeration district and we can reconstruct where that district's boundaries were, we know they were at least inside that particular boundary. which is sort of our vaguest sort of place to put people, but it's still a lot better than sort of a county or a township or a state.
Awesome. Yeah, that does make a big difference when you're working with data. And it's one of those things when you go to the Time Traveler app, not every person can be placed in the house they live in. For some, we do only know the street address or just their general location. But what percentage of people have you been able to place right in their home?
So right now, we have geocoded or mapped people from the 1880 and then the 1900 through 1940 censuses. And we have over 379,000 individuals who we've been able to map to one of those 4 geographies.
That's amazing.
Now, yeah, and naturally we want to get them all into their house. So that sort of building level, the first or finest of the 4 geographies, is sort of the gold standard. And we've been able to get about 17% of those people mapped to the house that they actually lived in with a pretty high level of confidence, which is a really good result, believe it or not. And many of the other people that we weren't able to get into the houses were at least able to get into, for example, their street, which puts them pretty close to where they lived.
Awesome. Yeah, that is just amazing that we can take data that somebody has handwritten down over 100 years ago, walking house to house to house, and place it in this digital format today. That to me is just spectacular. So speaking of exciting things, as we're getting closer and closer to launch here, Dan, and you've seen the app really beginning to take shape, is there any particular part about this app that you're really excited about?
Well, the toughest thing that we're attempting to do here is to create a piece of software that allows you to fly virtually across space and time, sort of exploring the landscape, both the actual physical landscape of the past, but also the social landscape, the people and the communities that live there. And so the process of mapping the census is a way to associate people in records, individual human beings who were recorded at one particular moment in time, and map them across space and time in a digital environment. So we're repopulating a reconstruction of historical landscapes at different times with the people that lived on those landscapes. And so what's really exciting about it is it's not just a list that you can search, because in theory, you could go to the records, the federal archives, and look at the census and troll through thousands and thousands of reels and microfiche to find information. You could also build a digital version of that online where you can search. And that's where sites like Family Search come in, where you can look up your ancestors from census data and other data. What the Keweenaw Time Traveler allows you to do, in addition to those things, you can search for people, but you can also fly over the landscape using various maps and aerial photographs and representations of the landscape. And we have mapped all those people in the census and other records to the places where they lived and worked. And so I'm really excited about that because it's a different way to explore the past. And it's very intuitive, because we all know that we use Google Maps and other things like that nowadays to navigate, to places we want to go. And this is sort of a time traveling version of that.
Well, great. Dan, thanks again for joining us this week. Fellow time travelers, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about what we've been doing here behind the scenes to get this new Explore app ready for you. To keep up to date on all the going-ons here, you can follow us at keweenawhistory.com, follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. That's it from us for now, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.